Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Before we jump into this, please, if you like this video, like, subscribe, etc. And also check out the validated Ukrainian charities that appear in the description of the video. It's incredibly important for us to help Ukrainians remain resilient at this time. And a quick word also, thank you to everyone who has supported this channel through Patreon and buy me a coffee and so on. Please do check out the equivalent ways of supporting my guests on the channel today. And they are Operator Starsky, Anna Danylchuk, and Cormac Smith. I'll give a quick introduction, and then today we're going to focus on one single topic, that is peace, the idea of peace and victory. Are these one and the same things? And are we hearing some disturbing noises from the Western political establishment? The idea that they may fall for peace without victory, which would be illusory. Well, we're going to unpack that topic in a minute. But let's start with my fantastic guests. Anna Danylchuk has been creating a war diary since the early days of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022 and communicates this powerfully in her videos with extraordinary honesty. Operator Starsky is a former Ukrainian National Guardsman and is a YouTuber whose conversations are an inspiration for everyone following the war and supporting a Ukrainian victory. Cormac Smith worked as a strategic communication advisor to the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine from 2016 onwards and is a fierce defender of Ukrainian agency, freedom, and victory. Welcome everybody to this panel.
Hello, Jonathan.
Well, this seems to be really timely because President Zelensky is going to be in Washington. He's going to meet Biden. We don't know exactly the contents of his victory plan, but there is as much conversation around peace as there is victory. The first question is peace and victory two sides of the same plan in Zelensky's mind? We'll come to his Western supporters and interlocutors and even detractors in a minute. But do you think Zelensky really has the sort of, this is the flip side of the victory plan as the peace plan, or are there perhaps some subtle differences between the two of those? Let's start with Andre.
It's really easy. I believe that peace is victory. And in order to understand it, again, it's really easy. Russia invaded Ukraine, bringing its troops to Ukrainian territory. The only way to roll back, the only way to reach peace in Ukraine is to remove Russian troops from Ukrainian territory. That's all, basically. If there's no Russian troops on Ukrainian territory, then there's peace and there's no war, nobody dies. And of course, make sure that they don't hit Ukraine with their long-range weapons, etc. But this is the main thing. Their troops must be removed from the territory of Ukraine. I don't see how Russian troops staying on the territory of Ukraine is considered peace. In my opinion, it's absolutely not logical and irrational. And this is something that we must achieve. Russian troops must be removed from the territory of Ukraine and our borders must be restored. We should roll back to January 2022 at least. Of course, we would prefer to roll back to 1991, but generally that's the main thing. Russian troops must not be present on the territory of Ukraine in any number. And this is what we call peace and basically victory. Anything else is nothing but manipulation.
Well, Ukrainian people are very careful wishing each other peace. We always say that we want peace, but only after victory. And I know that peace formula, peace plan, peace summit is a popular term that already circulates global media, but I'd prefer it to be a victory formula, a victory forum, and so on. Because without the defeat of Russia, and I'd say its demilitarization, peace is impossible, unfortunately, in our part of the world and actually in many other parts where Russia causes chaos and troubles. And for me, peace means Ukrainian border 1991. And also serious responsibility of Russia for the war crimes committed during this period. It's not just about them leaving the territory of Ukraine. It's about them paying for the destruction, paying for so many human lives taken or ruined, and most importantly, for the violation of international laws and agreements, undermining borders literally of every country that let's say borders another bigger country or a country with nuclear weapons or something like that. And I see that my personal mission in many of my videos right now is actually to remind people that it's not that much about Ukraine, saving Ukraine, helping Ukraine, returning back Ukrainian borders, as it is about defeating this evil that not just invaded an independent country in the 21st century and shelled it with bombs that can weigh 500 kilos, but it is about the responsibility and about this violation of international laws, that so many crimes committed, war crimes. There is an order, actually a number of orders of the International Criminal Court against Putin. So without that all, no peace and no victory, because unpunished evil grows and every person knows that.
And Cormac, there is, of course, the infamous episode of British history where Chamberlain came back from Munich brandishing a piece of paper as if that was some incredible triumph. That triumph proved to be illusory because it was followed by further aggression, further vacillation and weakness by the West. And of course, in that instance, it led to World War II and gave impunity not just to Germany, but also to Russia to think that it could carve up Poland. Are we in a similar position now that we are exuding weakness and appeasement signals?
I believe we are, Jonathan, and I believe that we are in danger of failing to read the lessons from history that appeasement does not work. So I'm going to answer the question in terms of peace and victory. Are they one and the same in two parts, if I may. In the first part, I'm going to concentrate on Ukraine. And unlike my other two friends on the panel, I'm an outsider. But I'm an outsider who fell in love with Ukraine over a 2-year period that I worked at the heart of the Ukrainian government. There will be no long-standing peace in Ukraine without a just victory, and that just victory can only be driving Russia back to the 1991 borders. That includes Donbass, but it particularly includes Crimea, because we must remember that so long as Russia holds Crimea, Ukraine will never be secure. Crimea is like a dagger into Ukraine's underbelly, and holding Crimea gives Russia a lot of control and ability to threaten the Black Sea and the vital Black Sea ports. So quite simply, it is international law. Ukraine was illegally invaded, 20% of its land taken. Over 120,000 war crimes are currently being investigated by Ukraine's Prosecutor General with the aid of the international community. And I don't have to remind friends here that these are some of the most despicable, barbarous war crimes imaginable in terms of the rape and torture and murder of men, women, children, even babies, and wiping whole cities and villages off the face of the map. So there can be only one victory. And I would suggest, from my understanding of Ukrainian people, if there is a settlement imposed on Ukraine that is any less than that and allows Russia to keep part of what they have plundered and stolen, Ukrainians will never be at peace. So Ukraine can only finally be at peace after a just settlement, and remind that is back to 1991 internationally recognized borders, which Russia has no right whatsoever to violate. And we should probably remember at this point the Budapest Memorandum, where the United States and Britain promised to guarantee Ukraine's territorial integrity in return for Ukraine giving up what was at the time, I believe, the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. Well, Russia, of course, also signed that historic document, and we know that Russia has spat on that historic document the same way as they repeatedly spit on other documents that they sign. So the only effective peace here is a just peace, and that involves both back to 1991 borders and then allowing Ukraine to have the security, which in my view is taking Ukraine into the EU and NATO in short time. But the second point that I want to make very briefly is for those out there, and there are unfortunately many who don't really care about Ukraine as much as you or I, Jonathan, or as much as our two Ukrainian friends with us today, there is something else. There is much more at stake in Ukraine than Ukraine. If we are to allow, we in the West are to allow Russia have any sort of a victory, and that would be holding on to any of the land they have plundered, stolen, and raped, it will destabilize and weaken us as a Western rules-based order, and it will be a green light for other despots and autocrats around the world, chief among them Russia's main allies at the moment in North Korea, Iran, and of course China, who are moving ever further on their no limits friendship with Russia. And we know now that the Chinese, along with the Iranians and the North Koreans, are regularly supplying lethal aid to Russia. So there's much more at stake. In fact, I would say the way of life that you and I, Jonathan, have taken for granted since we were born is what is at stake.
And I wanted to pick up on something you say there. We, of course, care about Ukraine very much. It started, I think, with a concern for international order and just the general sort of fairness and unfairness of what Russia's doing. But as we've come closer to Ukraine and Ukrainians and understood that there's something extremely precious there, something extremely powerful that has helped Ukrainians emerge from the monolithic horror that is the Soviet Union, that boot stamping on a human face forever that was Stalinism. It's more and more impressive the more we find out. Not everyone cares, obviously, in the way we do. It seems to me that there's something more pernicious going on here. I'm going to throw this question at Anna to start with, and that is that many, many Western leaders, even the ones who profess to really be pro-Ukrainian and have a concern for Ukraine, ultimately they're far more concerned about this so-called collapse of Russia, the sort of scenarios of imagined chaos that would follow such a thing. Implicit in that also is the idea that somehow we can control it. Somehow we can control it by moderating our support for Ukraine, moderating Russian behavior with words and not actions. Of course, these are completely illusory. Anna, how problematic is this for Zelensky's mission, given that it seems many, many politicians in the West are ultimately, if you applied a sort of Occam's razor to their foreign policy, ultimately are more concerned about nuclear catastrophe, nuclear threat, Russian collapse, unfortunately, than they are about the security and future of Ukraine?
Fear is definitely the worst reaction to the attacks from such bullies as Russia. Because whenever they sense this fear, they start repeating their threats, and politicians, they very rarely, but from what I observe, ordinary citizens may be more decisive and brave. And for example, when the government in Poland decides to simply trace the missile that was directed on Ukraine, spent 39 seconds in Polish space, and then returned back to Ukraine, the people feel differently. The people want them to be shot down, Ukrainian lives saved, strengths demonstrated. But unfortunately, Russia uses lots of arguments since the times of the Cold War. But I think Putin definitely will not use nuclear weapons because he wants to live. He has so many bunkers. He was hiding during COVID times, and he's definitely not a suicidal type. And he knows the moment he uses nuclear weapons, he will have serious troubles with the rest of the world. Many afraid this may happen after the collapse of the Russian Federation. Many lack knowledge about the structure of the Russian Federation itself. And unfortunately, there are still people who think that it is extremely homogenic, that people on all the territory of the Russian Federation are very similar, when in fact it consists of 22 people's republics that are very different and actually tried to proclaim their independence in the 90s, like Tatarstan, like Sakha, and so on. And at the same time, even if they are afraid of this potential collapse or dissolution of the Russian Federation, Putin did not leave us any other choice. When he started war, not just against Ukraine, but against Western values, democratic values, because it's a mistake to think that he needs resources in Ukraine or something else. He wants to restore the monster of the Soviet Union, the zone of influence. He needs chaos and troubles in Europe, in the United States, in Australia, whenever and wherever he can create this things. And of course, other authoritarian regimes get inspired by that. So when Putin invaded Georgia in 2008, or maybe even in times of the Second Chechen War, he did not leave a choice to those people who respect human life and democratic values, but to defeat him and millions, unfortunately, of those who support him. Because once again, as your beautiful leader once said, if a country is run by a dictator, it is not only a dictator to blame. So we have serious troubles with the population of Russia, which is not shaped into society. I don't wait, they will protest or something will happen. I remember how the president of the United States was worried before the collapse of the USSR. And you all know his chicken bush speech that is often remembered in Ukraine, how they were asking us not to proclaim independence, but these processes were already happening. Like, it's impossible to stop a natural flow of like history, culture, development, and so on. Nothing bad happened. The same as a Ukrainian, I believe that only with the total military defeat of Russia and its future dissolution, peace and security and well-being can be achieved, not just for us Ukrainians, but even for Russians. Those very good people who still care about Russian people, even though they are on tanks and on aircraft, kill Ukrainian people. But still, if you want their lives to be saved, we need to defeat Putin. And I think that such a big territory is not likely that it will remain democratic. Russia did not have a history of democracy, not like a year, nothing. So that dissolution perhaps must be controlled, must be supported, and we definitely have to teach them democracy. When I say we, I don't mean Ukrainians, I mean all the world, because they will not recreate it, they will not build something democratic by themselves. They don't know what that is. Like every 20 years, they create another dictator, they worship that dictator, and they ruin lives of other countries that border with Russia. So when Putin violated all the rules, when Putin actually proclaimed the Third World War against democratic countries, he did not leave us a choice. It is either we win or authoritarian regimes win. And the dissolution of the Russian Federation is the natural process that will follow this military defeat and a final destruction of the imperial myth of Russia.
Now, Andrei, over to you. The challenge here, isn't it, is that no Western government is going to publicly say that their aims are regime change, let alone the dissolution of Russia. And likely their policies are geared up to doing the opposite, which is trying to shore up and hold the zombie empire together.
You see, the thing here is they're trying to find a way to save their countries, which is natural, which I can understand completely. The problem is Russian warfare is already waged in those countries, and Russia uses all kinds of their resources they utilize, both farms to create tension within those countries. They utilize their fake media, etc., etc., which, as I already mentioned numerous times, is part of military plan. That if you have served in the army, it means that this plan has some specific goals that Russians are trying to reach, and it's not just done because they want to make people fight in European countries or within the United States just for fun. It's done because they have geopolitical goals that are signed, that are written on paper, and they follow instructions. So Russian invasion of the West currently is informational, it's hybrid invasion, but Russian invasion of West will not just stop there. And because Russian terrorist attacks on the West, Russian terrorist act in Salisbury, for example, they were happening way before the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and they will continue happening. So unfortunately, not a lot of people still understand this, but the governments, they already start raising alarms because their intelligence provides them with necessary data obtained as a result of their intelligence operations and stuff like that. And they understand that this will only increase the pressure, the hybrid warfare will only increase on the West, and Russians won't just stop there. So they understand the risks which this Russian hybrid warfare poses to the democratic countries, to the democracies of the world, and they understand that they must fight back. And we can see already examples of, for example, different media created to combat Russian disinformation, like in Poland. I believe it's the most recent case that we can talk about. And in the future, we will see more. Again, recent not discoveries, I would say, recent publications, recent cases that were published by Department of Justice of the United States. Again, I want to believe that it's not just due to the elections, but at the same time, those investigations exposed big chunk of the Russian propaganda, of the Russian informational warfare waged specifically in the United States. So I think that it's up to the governments to decide whether they want to preserve and defend their democracy and future of their countries, or they want to drown in protests and violence, and they want to see destabilization caused by Russian disinformation and Russian terrorist attacks on their territory, because unfortunately the threat is not abstract, it's a real threat that people are facing right now. On the other hand, because countries are not run by idiots, not often, right? They understand that public safety, public security, collective security is extremely important, and they understand that they need to protect it as well. And there's absolutely no way to consider that collective safety and security is protected when half of Ukraine is occupied by Russian terrorists. How can you say that you're protected against criminals if criminals are sitting in the next room? I mean, it's not logical and completely irrational. And I have this hope that we will be heard. On the other hand, this hope is enforced by the fact that Ukraine will be represented by Ukrainian president during the upcoming speech, because Ukrainians have one specific thing that is extremely important, even though it may sound naive. But, you know, I was thinking about what can Ukraine give to the world? What can we share? And one thing that we can share is this extreme motivation that we have. And this is something that we can share with the people, which is extremely, extremely important if we want to fight against brainwashing, if we want to protect our citizens against Russian disinformation, is bravery and motivation. Unfortunately, we had to have war in order to discover those features within us, but this is something that we can share that will help Europe and America to defend themselves, because Ukrainians have this incredible ability to stay motivated during the hardest times of their lives. And we also have this ability to share it with all the people who support us. And I believe that this is something that we will present to the world and teach the world how to stay motivated and united during the hardest times, facing the hardest threats. I sincerely believe that this will happen.
Now, Cormac, this really brings up an interesting point when Starsky was talking there, and this is the idea that many politicians in the West, when they talk of Ukrainian peace, they're talking about, in their minds, a conflict which is isolated and a peace which relates to Ukraine, not necessarily to global security. Russia, and in Putin's 2007 Munich security speech, it's clear that he wants to change the international order, and invading Ukraine was just the first step in potentially a multi-step plan to upend the global order. Yet our conception of peace is in no way global, and we're not demanding of Russia anything that has that that sort of global character. In some ways, this is ignoring everything that Andrew was saying there, which is basically we are facing hybrid threats as well as physical threats of assassination, arson, sabotage. There are now numerous cases of this across Europe, including threats against military sites and people with very specific military-related skill sets. This, to an extent, is being suppressed when we are focusing on the idea of peace and really isolating it in the context of Ukraine. Do you get the sense that our politicians are trying to bury all this other stuff, forget it, look away, pretend it's not happening, because it makes things much more complex, and it means they have to have grown-up conversations with their electorates, which I fear many of them are not prepared to do?
In short, Jonathan, yes, I do. I want to say three things, if I may, and I want to start by addressing what Andrei has just said, which I find myself in violent agreement with. The first was what Andrei is talking about, hybrid warfare. As far back as early 2017, late 2016, early 2017, I was working with Pavlo Klimkin to distill down and say that to try and tell the world that there was three fundamental truths that everybody needed to understand about Russia. One was the whole concept of Ruski Mir, which translates into Russia not respecting borders. The other was the simple, very, very simple fact that you can't trust Russia. And we coined the, you know, I love my sound bites, Russia lies on an industrial scale. But the more important, probably the most important one was world leaders needed to understand the concept of Russian hybrid warfare, sometimes now referred to as grey zone warfare. And this was no secret. I had started studying this before I first went out to Kyiv, and it's all out there in open source. You know, Google Russian hybrid warfare, Google Gerasimov doctrine, read the great Peter Pomerantsev and many other great sources. And you know, I was out with Pavlo Klimkin in late 2017 at a big security conference in Halifax in Canada. And I sat beside Pavlo as he told the conference and the world's media who were there that we are not in a second Cold War with Russia at the moment. We are in a hot war with Russia. And that is a hybrid war, but have no doubt it is a war nevertheless. Unfortunately, far too few, to go back to your point, Jonathan, were listening at the time. And, you know, we know the plethora of assassination attempts and cyber attacks and interference in elections and all the sort of different things on the bot farms in St. Petersburg and Moscow, run by the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, originally found by Prigozhin, and all. We know of all that, but we have turned our face against it. So that's the first thing. Absolutely, we are at war with Russia, and Russia will turn kinetic effects upon its enemies when it deems it is safe for Russia to do that. At the moment, it decided in 2022 that it was going to go kinetic. It was going to go further kinetic with Ukraine, having first invaded Ukraine, of course, in 2014 with the invasion in the Donbass, which the Russian hybrid war machine tried to, and with some success, tell the world was actually a Ukrainian civil war. It never was. We know that, and also with the illegal annexation of Crimea. The second point that I want to address that Andrei took up was what Ukraine has to give the world. And I started as early as my first month out in Kyiv, embedded in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to say, you know, Ukraine needs her allies at the moment, and we needed the support. And this was 2016, remember? And I said, Ukraine needs her allies, but, you know, the West needs Ukraine as well. And what became very, very clear to me early on was we needed Ukraine for something we had lost. And I've said already, Jonathan, you and I, not so much Anna and Andrei, but you and I grew up basically taking our great freedoms for granted. I met people when I went out to Ukraine who had not grown up in that way. They had grown up in the Soviet Union, and they were still living under the partial boot of the Soviet Union and trying to move away from that. That was what I started learning from the people that I met and worked with, and some became friends for life in between 2016 and 2018. So, you know, I tell a little story. The first time I met my minister, Pavlo Klimkin, a man who I developed huge regard and respect for, I asked him a question that I always ask leaders when I meet them. When I say leaders, I mean chief executives or ministers or council leaders or wherever I've worked with over the years. And I always ask them, what do you want to be famous for? And normally I get some sort of a fantasist boys or girls' own story of how they like to see themselves. Pavlo stopped and thought and told me this was a good question and he needed to think about it. He proceeded to talk to me about freedom for probably 10 minutes without drawing a breath. What it meant for him, what it meant for the Ukrainian people, what it meant for government, at every single level, what freedom actually meant. Pavlo Klimkin, if anybody on this panel knows him, is an exceptionally bright and thoughtful man. And that lesson, I always go back to that. That lesson was with virtually every single person I met in my 2 years in Ukraine. Freedom was what they had, this hunger for freedom. And the world has got to remember, Ukraine as a modern nation state may be only 30 odd years old, but Ukraine as a nation, as a collection of people, goes back possibly 1500 years, when Moscow, Kyiv was a great world city, when Moscow was a forest with nothing in it. And for a great period of that time, there has been a sense, and that sense has really developed, I think, in the last 100 years, and in particular, it has accelerated since the Maidan Revolution of 1314. There is a real hunger and appreciation for freedom. There's people in Ukraine know what the price is, and unlike many of us in the West, as you have proven, Ukrainians are willing to pay the price for freedom. This is something we have gone soft, and this is something we are in danger of losing in the West. So I started saying in 2016, you know, we also need Ukraine, and for many reasons. And Andrei, what you say about the strength and the courage and the will to fight. Yes, we need Ukraine for something that we have lost if we are to maintain the best of ourselves and the best of our life. And I want to finish off with just one other point. And it's a point in three. It's a point, I'll talk about fear, and I'll talk about reset. And there is a fear in the West of of Russian retaliation and the ridiculous fear that they might go nuclear. Well, I don't think they will, and an awful lot of people far smarter and more educated, more experienced than I don't believe they will. But there is also this great fear of the which Andre again mentioned, or Anna mentioned, of the Russian Federation falling apart. I've got to tell you, there's nothing we can do. You know, regime change is not up to us. The Russians can do that. There is nothing we can do to prevent the Russian Federation falling apart. And I will quote one of your most esteemed regular guests, Jonathan, General Ben Hodges, who talked on this very subject, I think the last time you interviewed him. And he said, we shouldn't fear it. We shouldn't fear the Russian Federation falling apart. What we must do is use all of our agency to prepare for it, because we can't stop it. And the third thing I want to talk about, which is obviously related, is reset. There is this fallacy in the West that we must have some sort of a reset with Russia. If we have learned nothing since 1989, 1990, since the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the kleptocratic coming to power of the current Kremlin regime, which is based on nothing but mafia and KGB principles. If we have learned nothing in the last 30-odd years, it is that a reset with Russia is not possible. They are not interested in our democratic ideals. They use our democratic ideals against us. That's all I want to say for now.
Well, we've got time for just one more question in this panel discussion, and I think it's going to be a pretty quick response, but it just brings together all of the threads, I think, that have been mentioned here. This is the fallacy that we can somehow control and prevent a Russian collapse, when in fact it seems to me that by not giving everything to Ukraine that it needs for a much sharper, shorter, and more decisive war, not only are we elongating the suffering and trauma, not only are we putting at risk the Ukrainian state and its ability to make progress in the war, we are, through these actions, putting huge pressure on Russian demographics and on the Russian economy. I won't say politics here because it doesn't have an open and transparent political system like we do. It's an unpredictable, autocratic one. Nonetheless, we are ensuring that when the big one comes, when the earthquake actually hits the zombie empire, we're ensuring, I think, that it's going to be far, far worse than it would have been if they'd been, dealt a short, sharp defeat in, say, 2023 or the latter part of 2022. So quick answers for everyone. I'm going to fire this at Anna first. Do you sort of agree with that idea that the West's cautious policies in trying to preserve the Russian Empire has actually almost inevitably going to make its eventual collapse more traumatic?
Obviously, because, I would like to continue this thought about the impossibility of the reset of the relations with Russia, not only because Russia considers all the democratic countries its enemies, and even if some candidates, for example, for the US president, speak about this negotiations with Putin, doing whatever he wants, in reality, Putin wants nothing from the United States or the United Kingdom apart from destroying well-being and normal life of these countries. And I think that apart from these delays, when Ukraine literally ran out of weapons that we need to at least defend Ukraine, if not defeat Russia, no one in Ukraine wanted to give up, neither civilians nor soldiers. And it was obvious, even in these darkest days, we were saying that we will continue, either with you or without you, because for us, it is an existential fight. It continues for 300 years. All the nations, democratic nations that border Russia, do not need any explanation. They clearly understand what kind of threats this country imposes on the world. I honestly cannot understand how people can be afraid of the future collapse and who will possess the nukes, and how come they are not afraid of the modern Russia, of Putin, Gerasimov, Shoigu, and millions of zombies having access to all of that and already ruining and shaking everything. And even with our attention to Russian propaganda, with our skills and knowledge, I'm sure we don't know half of the problems that were created by Russia, and we did not assign them to Russia. So that's why, for me as a Ukrainian, the most painful thing is that this delay, this inability of Ukraine to fight to the fullest, investing and giving the most valuable, and I don't want to say resource, the most valuable people. It's not about Ukraine asking for money or weapons. We already give our land, and it was turned into a battlefield. It was never my vision of my future. Also, people that protect, and once again, they protect not only Ukraine, because Putin needs wars. Putin is ready to expand. But unfortunately, all of these delays, these are not a victory that will come later. These are first of all thousands of Ukrainian lives lost that cannot be rebuilt, restored with the help of any alliance. And most importantly, these are more and more conflicts around the world. And these are more and more conflicts and radical misunderstandings, confrontations in countries around the world. And I'm sure that many protests, many radical problems that appeared in different EU countries or in the US are actually the result of this hybrid warfare and various programs that Russia developed for decades, because they are at war. And many good global leaders still believe they can avoid this third world war, concentrating on terms and vocabulary that they are using, when actually Putin and lots of his dictator friends are already fighting in this world war.
Cormac, I think you've probably answered most of this question in your previous response, but do we need to get over this idea?
I'm going to be, look, I'm going to be very short. I'm going to tell a brief but a true story. In 2016, one of the first things I did in Kyiv was to have, I think it was 13 or 14 of the most important European ambassadors recalled to Kyiv for a week, so I could do training on both how to handle the media, but on message discipline, so we could start moving towards the different capitals, giving out the same message. And a senior diplomat in the British Embassy at the time called me and said, not my boss, who was Her Majesty's ambassador, by the way, most certainly not, but a senior diplomat called me aside and said, Cormac, the Ukrainians are very fond of telling people that they are fighting for the rest of us. This doesn't go down very well in European capitals. Maybe you should tell them to stop saying it. That's a true story. And that gives you a sense, and we still haven't moved sufficiently far beyond that. But you know, I'm going to confine the rest of my answer to just 12 words, and listen to them. It's our money and guns today, or our daughters and sons tomorrow.
And the last word, over to you, Operator Starsky.
Are Western politicians overly cautious? Yes, they are. And of course, we can understand them, because this is how diplomacy works, right? But if people who live in Canada or United States, if they think that, or even France, if they think that Russia is relatively far away and there is nothing to be afraid of, unfortunately, I have bad news. According to multiple studies and investigations that are currently broadly available to the public, Russia is waging international warfare in your country 100%. They pursue to reach such goals as increasing people's fear of future, as increasing nuclear hysteria, which, by the way, raises several questions. Why are Russians so interested in increasing this indication? But anyways, this is already happening in your countries, and Russians are doing all that using their media and using your own media. We understand that this is not something proper, and we understand that this may lead to devastating results. This may lead to violence, and this may lead to your country losing a lot of people, a lot of resources, a lot of rights, losing democracy, basically. And I believe that this is the time when you must understand that it's better to live in a safe environment, protected and caring after each other, protected by international military alliances, protected by people who care, protected by your friends, and protecting your friends, defending each other, than having this threat, than having this dangerous and absolutely atrocious neighbor, even though it's located far away from you, but it's already fighting against you on your territory. This is something we should consider. And if you choose to be protected and to protect others and ensure that you have peaceful tomorrow, then you must fight against terrorism 100%. It's not that hard. It only requires a bit more motivation, because unfortunately, Russians are very, very much motivated in defeating us. And Ukrainians, what we can share with you is this incredible will and desire to live and to withstand their attack. This is something we all must share.
Well, these are incredibly strong words. I hope people watching this will also tune in over the next couple of days to see what transpires as Zelensky visits Washington. And if you hear your representatives saying things which strike you as appeasement oriented, if you hear your representatives say things that sounds like they are about to throw Ukraine under the bus, don't just take it lying down. Protest, write to them, contact the media, get on social media yourselves, organize and agitate, because now is the time to stop our leaders from making yet another catastrophic mistake. Thank you to my guests today, Cormac Smith, Operator Starsky, and Anna Danylchuk.